Welcome to a new session on Aloysius Academia. So this video is a continuation of the previous video in which we covered how to build a paragraph, how to write it, how to split all the sentences, how to assign a specific job or a specific role for each sentence. So that was all covered in part one. In this part, we're going to learn more about how to connect paragraphs, how to connect one paragraph to the one before. So these two parts are very essential to watch them together to have an idea of how to get a full essay written in a very academic way and have a very strong essay at the end. So let's start. So now that we have learned how to build a paragraph, how to start it, how to build the ideas and the sentences and link the sentences within the paragraph and how to close or end the paragraph. So now there's another important point which will help the coherence of the whole essay at the end, which is how to connect one paragraph to the other. So that's different from how to construct or build one paragraph. That's one skill which we have covered, and now we're starting with how to connect one paragraph to the other. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, is that a strong transition from one paragraph to the other, it's not just using words like furthermore, however, this type of linking words, it's not enough. What you need to do is to show relationship between ideas. So what creates this connection? So how can I make it as a writer? How can I make it so obvious to the reader that I am making a connection between the second paragraph, the new paragraph I'm writing, and the previous paragraph we wrote? So let's have or consider the paragraph we've just shown as a first paragraph we wrote, okay, about recorded lectures. So that was the first paragraph we wrote. And that paragraph ended with their possible effect on class attendance must also be considered. So that was the last sentence we wrote in the previous paragraph we've just shown. Okay. So now we want to write the second paragraph. So how can we make it clear to the reader that there's a connection between the second paragraph we are about to write, the new one, and the paragraph we have just written, the older one? So there are three main ways to connect one paragraph or to connect the new paragraph to the one before. And the first one is a repeated idea. What do I mean with a repeated idea? So if the first paragraph ended with attendance, so which means that the first paragraph, it ended with the idea of class attendance and its effect on students and how is that related to the recorded lectures. So that was the idea of the last sentence we wrote in the first paragraph. So what you can start the second paragraph with, it's also with the attendance idea. So you're going to write the topic sentence. It needs to have an idea around the effect of attendance and the effect of recorded lecture and attendance. So that's how the second paragraph should start. And I will show you just in a minute how the example will look like, okay? But you need just now to understand this first method of connecting the new paragraph to the previous one is using the same idea. So here we ended with attendance, then the second paragraph will start also with the idea of attendance. The second method to use to connect one paragraph to the other is using a reference expression. What do I mean with that? So if you start the second paragraph or the new paragraph you're writing, if you started with something like this possible effect, so that's the first three words of the new paragraph. If the first new words are this possible effect. So for me as a reader, the word this, it tells me that this points back to something already introduced. So if you ended the first paragraph with this, and then you started the second paragraph with this possible effect, so for me as a reader, it tells me that this here, it goes back to the attendance. So that's what you can do, okay? Although personally, I feel this technique sometimes is clearer when it's used, but this one, it's also possible, and you can use it, and you can mix between these two and use this sometimes and use this other times. But yeah, using, for example, this, it shows a reference expression. Then the third technique, which is using a clear logical relationship. What do I mean with that? So, for example, you start the second paragraph with something like however. So you ended the first paragraph with this. The class attendance must also be considered. However, this tells me that as a reader, that the second paragraph will now present a limitation or a contrast to the point that was introduced in the first paragraph. And that's what's happening. So if the first paragraph was about the advantages of recorded lectures, if the second paragraph starts with however, it tells me as a reader that, okay, this paragraph is now going to be about the contrast, which is the disadvantages of recorded lectures. So that's also a clear logical relationship that can be used to connect one paragraph to the other. So these are the three main techniques. And now let's have a look at real examples to understand them more. Good. So let's have a look now at real examples of how to use each of these methods. So the first method, which is repeat or rephrase a keyword, which is the first method we use. So let's have a random now paragraph. So that, let's say that this is the final or sentence of a paragraph you have just written. And the final sentence says, one difficulty is that financial cost, one difficulty is the financial cost of the program. Okay, so if you have a paragraph that ended with this, and now you want to use method one, which is repeating the same keyword or the same idea to start the second paragraph. So the second paragraph is gonna look something like that. This financial burden may be particularly serious for smaller institutions. So we can see here clearly that the final sentence of the first paragraph ended with the idea of issues with the financial cost. And then the second paragraph, it's also started with the burden of financial cost or issues again with financial cost. So we can see here that's one way of connecting the second paragraph to the first paragraph, which is starting with the same idea, financial cost, issue with financial cost. Then we get to method two, which is using a reference word. So for example, if you have a paragraph and the final paragraph sentence was like that, students may receive limited feedback on large courses. Okay, so now you want to write a second paragraph and link it to this paragraph and use a reference word. And as we said, a good reference word is this. You say this problem can be reduced through structured peer assessment, for example. So if I am a reader, okay, or I'm an examiner, and then I finished reading the first paragraph and then I started the second paragraph and I found that the first sentence of the second paragraph, it starts with this problem can be reduced. It just tells me that this paragraph is talking about something that was already introduced previously in the previous paragraph. So this now shows a very good connection between these two paragraphs. There are other useful expressions to make this reference word connections, like for example, this difference, this finding, these results, etc. It just shows that these two paragraphs are linked and that whatever problem we are conveying here, it's related and already introduced in the first paragraph, the one before. Then we get to the third method, which is using logical relationship, which is, as we said, for example, if the second paragraph start with however, which means that now we're going to talk about something in contrast to the first paragraph. Okay, this is, I think, one of the most linking ways that I see students use them when linking, for example, one paragraph to the one before, using these type of things. So here are a few examples. If you want to, for example, in the second paragraph, to add more points to the ones you mentioned in the first paragraph, you can start the second paragraph with something like furthermore, in addition. If you want to say something in contrast, you can say however, in contrast, in the contrary, something like that. Then if you want to say to talk about the cause in the second paragraph, then you can start it with because of this we blah blah blah. So you can start it with that. Other stuff like therefore, as a result, here it will show the reader that you're going to talk about the consequences that were already developed and introduced in the first paragraph. Also, you can start with something like for example or for instance It means now you're going to give deeper and more examples about something that you introduced in the first paragraph. And you can also, for example, start with similarly, which means that in this paragraph, you're going to give another example of the same thing that was introduced in the first paragraph. These things usually, for example, in a PhD thesis, sometimes you will write a very long paragraph on one idea or one experiment, and then you want to link it to a different experiment, but it's, for example, similar. So you start with similarly, and then you talk about the other one. Because if you combine both of them in one paragraph, it's going to be too long paragraph. So that's why these phrases and these expressions are going to be very handy for you when it comes to writing very long written pieces and like essays and things like that. Okay, so finally we get to the common mistakes that you need to avoid when writing paragraphs. So there are a lot of common mistakes I saw students do all the time when writing essays. Possibly they are doing it without being conscious about it because they're not thinking at paragraph level or sentence level. What they think about is just the whole essay. So and that's the problem. When you zoom out, you will lose all these details. But what we need you to learn here is to zoom in at a paragraph level and at a sentence level, and this will give you the best result at the end for the whole essay. So the first common mistake is having too many ideas in one paragraph. So I see, for example, in one paragraph, a student might talk about exercise, improve health, help student make friends, reduce pollution, and save university money. So all of these ideas, they can be developed into a full paragraph on its own if you use the ideal framework. But we can see here that the student, they just crammed and crowded this paragraph with just a lot of ideas in just one paragraph. So this will look bad in your writing, especially if you do this all the time through the essay or through your writing. It will be so obvious to the reader that, okay, you are not capable of building and developing your paragraphs in a good way, in a professional way, or in an academic way. So that's I think one of the most common mistakes is having too many ideas in one paragraph. Always apply the ideal framework, and you will notice whether you need to split these ideas or not. The second thing is repeating instead of developing. So, for example, in a sentence, if you say exercise is important, it's very beneficial, and it has many advantages, they are all supporting the same idea. They are all in support of sport, and they are all just like singular points. They are not connected. They are not developed. So if this is an idea, for example, in the ideal framework, if this is an I, which is the idea, exercise is important, then how you develop it, why is it important, how is it affecting the students, for example, why is it beneficial, in what way is it beneficial, it has many advantages, what are the advantages, in what way it has an advantage. So you see all of these, it feels like they are separate ideas, they are not connected. And I see many students, they do that in their writing, and they are just keep, this will be very clear to the reader as sometimes we call it like waffle. It just extra words that they are not needed, but you're just throwing them to get to the word count. For example, in IELTS you need 250 words. You just keep throwing these disconnected sentences, so you can reach to the word limit. The third one is giving evidence without explaining it. So, for example, let's say that a student wrote that a study found that 70% of students preferred recorded lectures. So this is not a good sentence. Why? Because it does. What does this demonstrate? So this, if the student just wrote that and then they move to the next idea, but that's not developed. This idea is not developed. They needed to show what does this demonstrate. And as we mentioned before, the ideal framework, you mention the idea, then you need to develop it. Okay. And if this is, you are in the E, which is the evidence or the examples, then you need to analyze them, as we said. Okay. And that's also part of the ideal framework. So what does this demonstrate? How does it answer the question or the argument that you're trying to claim here, that the recorded lectures are good for students? So you need to develop the sentence. Do not write this and then you move on to the next idea. That's going to be a poorly developed idea. So you need to develop it more. Overusing linking words. That's also one of the most common problems I see, especially with international students. They keep throwing, linking words all the time in the paragraphs. I used to do it myself. I am international as well. I'm not a native speaker, English native speaker, but I know that when you are, learning and being taught how to, take IELTS exam, usually the teachers will just bombard you with these linking words and ask you to put them wherever you feel like it. But that's not right. You need to think of cohesion, which includes these linking words, as well as the coherence, which is linking the ideas, not just the linking words. Because linking the ideas is so important for the essay. Finally, we get to writing very long sentences to sound academic. Avoid writing long sentences. Try to split them into different sentences. Again, use the ideal framework to make sure that you write each sentence has a specific job that it gives. And finally, try to plan before writing. That's one of the most common, most important advices. Plan before writing. Okay, I hope you found this video helpful. Please comment if you want me to make a video on a specific topic that you're interested in, and see you in the new video. Thank you. And by that, we reach to the end of this video. Please, if you find it helpful, please support the channel by liking, comment, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Thank you, and see you in a different video.